Hello and welcome to Intoxicated Masculinity, where we talk about cocktails, pop culture, politics, and anything else that comes up. Today we're doing another one of our discussion topics, and today we're talking about a living wage. Who knew this would be a controversial thing to talk about? I'm joined today by Kale.
Hello.
And Brandon.
Hello, everyone. A living wage for all.
When we break this down, what is a living wage? Why don't each one of you say what you think a living wage is?
I actually have a definition up here on screen that I really liked. It's from the globallivingwage.org. It says their definition of it is the net annual income required for a household in a particular place to afford a decent standard of living for all members of that household. Elements of a decent standard of living include food, water, housing, education, healthcare, transportation, clothing, and other essential needs, including provisions for unexpected events. That sounds about right.
I would agree. I found an MIT project called The Living Wage. It's really interesting. You can actually go, and they've done a lot of the legwork on this, where you can actually pick out your city or your county. There are some cities too, but it's typically done by county. So, for example, we are all in central Iowa. I just used Polk County because it's the county that Des Moines in. And it'll list what they consider a living wage is in. So in Des Moines, for example, if you are an adult with no children, you're just a single person with no kids, no spouse, they consider a living wage to be about $14.32 an hour. The interesting thing is the poverty line for that person would be $6.13 an hour. So the federal government says that the poverty line is $6.13, but that doesn't take into account a lot of things. Things like Brandon was saying, healthcare. It talks about like housing and groceries, but you don't live on housing and groceries alone. There's so many other expenses. Not to mention education, and gas, transportation, all these other things. So in this case, the living wage is more than double, and this is again for a single person living in the Des Moines metro area, is more than twice what the poverty line is.
And if you read books like The Divide by Jason Hickel, you realize that globally the poverty line should be moved up from this artificial low that they keep it at, which is like $1.90 something per day, which is insane. But if you move it up to where people can actually do anything with that wage, it's that something like $5, and that ends up putting something like 4 billion people in below the poverty line.
So we've talked about this once before. What's the lowest wages you've worked for? Because I think for me it was 425, 425 or 475.
I think 475 sounds right.
Yeah, I believe that was the minimum wage when I started working.
What was the first year you guys worked?
My first job, I was 12, and that was volunteer work. So that would have been 88. My first job for pay was when I was 14, so that would have been 90.
So actually 1990 is when they increased the minimum wage to $3.80. And then it was increased again in 1991 to $4.25. And that's when I would have had my first job. My first job was 94. What about you, Kale? What year was your first job?
Well, I actually, when I was like 13, I think I walked beans. And the guy paid me $5 an hour to do that.
That's pretty common first job around here.
Yeah. I think my first paying job, I actually did pretty much the same thing, working detasseling for a company that's not around here anymore, I don't think. So I don't know.
Which one was it? Just out of curiosity.
It was Garst.
Oh, okay.
And I think they paid around $4.25, $5 an hour, somewhere in there. It's been a while, so.
The thing that I'm a very proud union member. one of a very shrinking breed, since there are so few workplaces which are unionized anymore, which is, I think, a detriment to society in general. I mean, all these things we have, the work week and the 8-hour workday, all these things, they come from unions. And I find it very frustrating that corporations have somehow convinced people that unions are just going to take their dues and then just, I don't know, take their $12 and ride off into the sunset or something. When we see that historically unions are the ones that get people these things, and I find it very difficult to understand how people have sided with corporations over unions, which are trying to help them out. Have you guys been union members at different points in your life?
Yeah.
I've never.
You've never been in a union, really?
No, I've never had a union.
There was a union at IBP. Were you just not there long enough for?
Yeah, I was only there for like a week. I was like, screw
That
this.
union apparently wasn't very successful.
It wasn't.
It was a terrible, terrible workplace.
It was IBP. I mean, I was only at Schneider for like a month, but they had a union. Actually, they were phasing their union out. New people weren't allowed to be part of it, as I recall.
That's very corporate America.
Well, I remember
That might have been it.
when Brandon's dad was getting ready to retire from 3M, and at that point, they were starting to say they were dropping pensions. They weren't going to give people their pensions anymore.
Pensions are a hard thing to come by now too. Andrea's got one, and it's kind of a rarity because they're more stable.
Well, that's because they want everybody to have 401ks.
Yeah. All the money goes into the tradable, losable part.
Right.
I'm
not quite sure how to structure this discussion. I'm sort of, I have very strong feelings about it. I think that, I think the first thing we need to understand as workers, and it's a phrase that people don't talk about very much. When you talk to other workers, nobody refers to themselves as workers. They refer to themselves as Cubs fans, or there's a million different identities they have, but people don't really use their identity as a worker. And I think that's something that's kind of tragic, because we are all workers.
They've managed to scrub the phrase working class from your identity when you say it.
Right. I mean, if you're a stay-at-home mom, I got news for you. You're a worker. You're doing work. You are doing labor. And so we all have that in common. So and it's a place where most people are spending a minimum of 1/3 of their life. I mean, you're spending 8 hours a day. Well, maybe not, weekends off, but a third of most of your days and it's something that we don't really talk about in a meaningful way.
You have no say in it, no democracy. One of the things that ethicaltrade.org was saying, without a living wage, workers may be compelled to work excessive overtime hours or multiple jobs. Definitely see that. Become bonded laborers, put their children into work instead of school, be denied their basic human rights to food, shelter, nutrition, health, housing, and education, and be unable to withstand crises such as ill health, which we definitely see in the U.S. all over.
Well, there was a study that came out that said the average family couldn't afford a $400 emergency, or I don't know the average, like a huge percentage of the American people couldn't afford a $400 emergency without going into debt. I mean, $400. Think about all the things that could go wrong in your life that would cost you $400.
New tires. I mean, just driving to work could get you that, just on new tires alone.
Twice.
Say that, Gail?
Twice that.
Well, yeah. I mean, I had to replace one tire the other day, and that was, I think, $150 to replace one tire. Imagine I had lost two, then you're talking, you're right up at your button right up against that $400 emergency. What if your brakes go out? What if you're, there's a million things. What if you get a fine?
And we have no public transportation. You have to own a car. You have to drive that thing. I drive 40 miles one way every day.
And well, I know in my family, there's lots of times where we come to each other and be like, hey, I need to borrow some money because I don't have enough money for this. And so, we help each other out. You know,
Yeah.
ask an in-law or a cousin or something, and it's just like, you know, hey, I scratched your back, you scratch my back. We're all on the same team here. Let's get through this.
What I find frustrating about that, and that's a good thing, it's a good thing that people help people out. But that's what the state is supposed to be. But the certain people have sort of convinced us that the state is the person who's coming to take away your money, rather than the state is the one that's there to protect us from predatory corporations, predatory lenders, predatory people. Um, and people have become so afraid of the government that they're throwing their arms around international conglomerates that have no interest in their lives. And so we want to make sure we deregulate a corporation that's going to poison a community, because we've been convinced by people like Ronald Reagan and the libertarians that the government is here to do evil. Well, that just doesn't stand up to scrutiny. I mean, the cigarette companies would still be selling cigarettes to people at the same rate as they always did, without any without most people even knowing that cigarettes were harmful, if they could. It's the government that came in and said no, and sued them. I mean, it's consumer protection groups in the government that prevent people from being injured by consumer products. And yet people still seem to be under this delusion that the government is somehow out to get them, and corporations are defending their freedom. Well, I've got news for you. If you think Apple is going to defend your freedom, then you're fucking sorely mistaken.
It's so less freedom. I mean, at least with the government, we get a vote. We get
Right.
no democracy in how the business is run. They tell us when to come to work. They tell us how long we can stay there, and how long when we can finally go, and how much we're going to get paid, and how much we're going to do. I mean, people talk about like, oh, I love democracy. Like, when do you really experience it? You get one vote a year, maybe, on some menial thing, maybe once every 4 years on the most powerful man. And it's like, that's it. That's your experience of democracy. You don't experience it in a regular day. You're tightly regulated. This idea that the vaccines are going to control you, what do you get out of it? What do they get out of it? Why bother? They have you already. They have your money. They have your consent. Even if it's manufactured, they have you.
So just a little piece of information about the minimum wage. The first minimum wage passed in 1938 under the Fair Labor Standards Act. So since 1938, we have gotten now all the minimum wages aren't raised under that particular act. They've come under various different rubrics over the years. So over the years, we get all these raises periodically. So if you go from 1938 to 2009, the longest we had ever gone without getting a raise, a minimum wage increase, was about 10 years. So throughout from 1938 to 2009, the longest you ever go is 10 years. We are currently 12 years since the last minimum wage increase. We are 2 years past the longest period where there has ever been a minimum wage increase. And on that track, if you take the $7.25 minimum wage, which is currently in effect, and look at it through the rubric of inflation, we should be making $9.33 an hour as a minimum wage. So $9.33 an hour, based on the passage of the minimum wage increase in 2009, we should be at least $9.33 an hour. Now, that is not to take into account cost of living increases, to take into account increases in productivity, or all these other things. If you just inflation alone, the minimum wage should be $9.33.
Here's a scary thought. I had a new employee come to my work, and I was told to train him. And so I worked with him for a few days, and in that time we were talking, and we talked about the minimum wage issue. And he was a younger guy, just your general typical Central Iowan American. And you know, his argument for why we shouldn't raise the minimum wage is because then they'll just raise the cost of living. And
But I mean,
I tried to explain to him that that's not how it works.
all studies have shown that doesn't actually happen.
Yeah.
Well, let's take a real a real concrete example. So let's say currently people at McDonald's are making $10 an hour, which obviously the McDonald's all over the country, it's different wage. But let's say, for example, they're $10 an hour. So let's say you say, okay, we're going to go ahead and whether it's the government or whether it's McDonald's Corporation, somebody's going to come in and say, okay, everybody at McDonald's is now going to make $15 an hour. So now you're increasing $5 per hour your labor cost for each employee. So that means you might have to charge a little bit more for your hamburger. But it's not much because they're doing such business and it's such a relatively small increase. Let's say you have 8 or 9 employees on shift at any given time. Let's say it's 10 to make the math easy. You're talking about $50 an hour. So all you have to do to your sales to make up that, and this is again if you buy into the capitalist stuff to begin with, which I don't, but just keeping within that realm, all you have to do is increase your food prices by an equivalent of $50 per hour. If you're serving 100 customers an hour, it's tiny. It's a tiny amount. It's right. So in other words, to pay for this increase of giving these workers a $5 an hour wage jump, you're going to increase the cost of a Big Mac by 75 cents. Well, if I'm going to a McDonald's and I know that the people there are actually getting a living wage, I'll gladly pay 75 cents more for the fucking hamburger.
Because they'll probably make it right.
Well, the other thing is, I mean, there's all these follow-on effects that come from these people getting a living wage. If they're giving a living wage there, they're probably going to stay there. They're going to be more likely to stay there, which means they're going to get better at their job. So there's so many follow-on effects that come from people at a job getting that living wage that it's a no-brainer, but they say that no, we couldn't possibly afford it. And you're telling me really, you can't afford $50 an hour in labor cost increase, even if you can increase the food prices by a little bit. I mean, is there literally anybody going to McDonald's that couldn't afford to pay an extra 75 cents or 50 cents extra for their burger? And it's ludicrous.
No, it's because but the Joe, fact Bob, is this: whoever wants to make sure that he has enough money to get that new yacht next year.
Well, the fact is this: if you were running a business, so let's say you're a McDonald's franchise owner, your meat costs X amount. That is not a cost that you can change. Your supplier is going to charge you this much for your meat. Your garbage removal is going to cost this much. All of your business costs are set costs. Now, they may fluctuate over time, but they are costs that you don't have any control over. The one cost that you have control over is wages. So in other words, if you want to increase your profit margin, the first thing you do is try to decrease wages, push down the overall cost of your labor.
Yeah. You know, it struck me, I was doing some research for this topic, and excuse me, even the Treaty of Versailles has a living wage as part of it. In Articles 387 to 399, it says, whereas the League of Nations has as for its objective the establishment of universal peace, and such a peace can be established only if it's based upon social justice. And then it goes on to say, and whereas conditions of labor exist involving injustice, hardship, and privation, parentheses, an important part of the conditions is urgently required. For example, by the regulation of the hours of work, including the establishment of a maximum working day and week, the regulation of the labor supply, the prevention of unemployment, the provision of an adequate living wage, the protection of the worker against sickness, disease, injury arising out of the employment. So way back when they were deciding how to make a peace treaty to end, what was Versailles, World War I, World War II?
It was World War I.
Yeah. They were deciding that we need to make the workers not starve and not be in these conditions that could lead them to once again feel the need to go to war.
Well, so you're saying the triple entente was a bunch of social justice warriors.
Yeah. I mean, it's even in the thing. It's pretty interesting.
Well, I mean, we started passing, like I said, we passed minimum wage laws here in the United States in 1938. And there was some interesting discussion about it because businesses fought, you're going to be amazed, businesses fought against a minimum wage. I know, shocking. So the minimum wage in 1938 was set at 25 cents an hour. And businesses just hemmed and hawed to no end about how horrible it was. And FDR and other people were like, it's a quarter. It's a quarter. It's a quarter an hour. If you can't pay your workers a quarter an hour, like, are you kidding me? I mean, it's what, $10 a week? I have to do my math, but it's this tiny thing. And it just goes to show you that businesses don't care. Whatever it is, if it hurts them 1 red cent, they will fight it to no end. And I think what people need to understand is businesses are not on your side. Businesses are against you. Businesses want to prevent you from getting anything.
Well, they want to get your money at least.
I was right. Yeah, at 25 cents an hour for a 40-hour work would be $10 a week. And I mean, obviously inflation is changed things quite a bit, but I mean, that these people were furious that they would have to pay a worker $10 every week to work a full, 40-hour week. It is infuriating.
I hear more, I hear talk about like a thriving wage and lowering the work week from 40 down to something like 20, just taking back as much of your own free time and your own one lifetime from corporations as you can get. And I mean, a living wage by the definition I read earlier sounds great. I would push for more if I could, if I had that kind of power. And people will say, oh, well, it'll put businesses out. Good. It's all right. And capitalism.
I have something I'm going to send to you guys. And what it is, it's a video of a senator talking to a CEO, explaining the situation of an employee there, and asking how is it that she is to balance her budget, with her salary versus the expenses that she needs to live. And I think it's a pretty fair depiction of what business leaders think of their workers.
Was that under George W. Bush? Is that from like the early 2000s?
It may have been.
I think I remember seeing something about that. But there's a sort of greater problem, because people will talk about the minimum amount to live, and they'll say, okay, you just need this and this and this, and you can live. But they always fail to look at what if something happens. And because in their life, if anything ever happened, their parents had the money to pay for it. But if you grew up really poor, what happens if, your brakes go out and all of a sudden now you can't get to work and you lose your job because you can't get to work? I mean, these are real concerns. So it's like you had enough money to live. You had enough money to pay your rent, to buy groceries, and to pay your car insurance, pay your car payment, but no more. It was like that was your that's the end of your money for the month. And now all of a sudden something happens. Well, now there's $675 outstanding to fix this thing, and you haven't got it. And that's what they don't understand. That's the right-wing ideology is sort of operating under this impression that, well, everything is going to be fine and nothing's ever going to happen. But I think all of us have lived long enough to know that shit fucking happens. You have gallstones, or you have appendicitis, or you get in a car accident that you have to be hospitalized for. I mean, these are things that happen to people on a day-to-day basis that for a lot of people could break them.
My first job out of high school was for 3M, and they had a policy. You had to spend 1 year as a temp and you couldn't miss 3 days. If you missed 3 days in that year, you got fired.
I find it almost quaint that you only have to spend a year as a temp, because now there's a lot of places where you could spend 5-10 years as a temp. I mean, temp work is that's a topic for another discussion, although it's definitely linked to this. But temp work is out of control.
Misrepresentation.
Misclassification.
Sorry.
Even that's above
Classification.
Internship. But
well, internships. I think internships is less tied to labor. I mean, it's definitely related to it, but I think especially unpaid internships, are sort of more related to how the establishment maintains their power.
I feel like, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, it feels like the path we're going down here. It's like, on top of, yes, labor unions are necessary to maintain the balance of power, and the fact that a minimum living wage is necessary to maintain your workforce. The biggest issue, I think, with all companies is healthcare. Insurance is a racket. And honestly, if we had a one-payer system, that would be a lot better. But in the meantime, employers need to provide their employees with health care. I'm middle-aged now. I finally got to a point to where I'm fairly happy with my job, and they provide me with benefits that are fairly equal to the work that I provide for that company.
no, they're not.
They're absolutely not, but
They're probably not.
I don't even have to look at them to know they're not.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go
I don't
into
know.
details. I'm not going to go into details, but no, I feel like healthcare is a major issue in this country, and a lot of this, the union could help with that. Obviously, having a minimum wage that makes it so you can afford a $400 emergency, which, lucky you if that's all it costs.
Well, right. I mean, that's the other thing is, like, what if your fucking transmission goes out? Because the transmission is going to cost you a hell of a lot more than $400.
Yeah.
Well, and you were saying that, unions maintained a balance. I don't think, I mean, even in their best, as much good as they did, I think they at best stemmed the tide. I don't think there was ever a balance with the power that corporations have. It would be nice. I mean, at the very least, having universal health care, it still wouldn't maintain a balance, but it would be so much better, because you could finally say, I can look for a different job without worrying that the sole provider for healthcare for your children and your spouse or whatever will no longer have that.
Well,
you could still have that option.
If you're somebody who believes that the capitalist system should be maintained as it is, or in some form like it is, which I don't necessarily believe that, but if that's what you believe, then every board of directors should be half labor. Every board of directors should be made up of half management, half labor. Because I'll tell you what, the management at General Motors doesn't know how to fucking put a tire on a car. And I'll tell you what, we need people that know how to put tires on cars more than people that know how to read balance sheets. Because we have a lot more cars to put tires on than we do balance sheets in a single corporation. Or that might not even be true, but it's horrifying. It is, Eugene Debs basically said, and I follow him on Twitter, even though he's been dead for 100 years. You can run a factory without managers. You can't run a factory without workers.
Unless you have robots.
Well, that's another discussion for another time.
Yeah,
but automation.
But it's one of the things, if workers realize their power, it's sort of the thing that it reminds me of is if you look at the South and you look at race relations in the South, I'm not probably not shocking anybody by telling you there's racism in the South. I know, everybody take a moment. But why is there racism in the South? You know, we talk about that, but we don't get into the roots of it. And the roots of it are the South. You had what was essentially a landed gentry. You had a landed aristocracy. And the only way they could get away with controlling all the money in the entire region was by telling poor white people that they were better than poor black people. When in actuality, if the poor black people and the poor white people all of a sudden were like, hey, wait a minute, we're getting fucked by the same people. Let's go burn their houses down. By the way, I am not telling anybody to burn anybody's house down, to clarify.
Do it.
But if they rise up, then the aristocracy has no chance. I mean, they couldn't hire enough armies because the armies would be made up of poor people.
Right. The armies are made of poor people. Yeah.
So the only way that racism continues to flourish is by continuing to tell poor whites in the South that they're better than other people. That there's one class of people that's one worse than them. So it's like you can feel good at being the second lowest on the totem pole.
Yeah. Meant to keep us divided. If there was three powers, it would be what? Money, propaganda, and majority. Majority is the strongest, but it's also the easiest to break. You separate and say you're better, you're worse, you did this, you did that, you're white, so you're better, or whatever. You know, it's to make us afraid of. This is actually reactionary right-wing politics now all the time. Everything is out to get you. It's out to get your little part of the world, and all the brown people are coming, and all the poor people, and all the non-standard religions are coming for you. You know, it's all of this, but it's all meant to break the power of majority, which would easily overwhelm money and propaganda if we could all stick together.
It's reactionaryism.
It is.
It's fundamentally reactionaryism. It is, and you know, I heard that a lot when I was a kid, and I never really understood. I guess I didn't fully understand what it meant. What it means is you don't have first principles. You don't have a first idea. You don't have a first agenda. What you have is you look out and you look for something that makes you feel like, no, I don't like that. And you react. Whereas a better idea is you sit down and you come up with a set of principles and you come up with a set of ideas and you say, okay, this is what we should do and this is why. But that's hard. I mean, coming up with an ideology that makes sense and helps people isn't an easy thing to do. I mean, we live in a country of 350 million people, and it's a hard thing in the best of times. Running any country with that many people is tough. But what's easy is saying, oh, look at that person with their hair, or look at that person with their whatever, and saying, oh my God, look out for those people. Those people are pretty scary. You know, I'm not saying different. And so that's an easy way to sort of to scare people. And it's sort of juxtaposed to people that are actually trying to come up with solutions. And it's harder. I mean, what is the solution to poverty in America? It's not an easy one. I don't know exactly what the solution is, but I can tell you this: it would take more than one bill to pass to end poverty in America, and it would be difficult. It would take time. But saying, "Ooh, gays are scary" is easy. And
it's also a safe bet that maintaining the current system isn't the way to fix it.
Right. And that's sort of at the base of it is we are living in a country which is crippled by inertia.
Well, it's why I also don't really care about nationalism. I don't particularly care about patriotism. I care very much about the people in this country, and I care a lot about the land that the country has formed. I don't care about certain songs or certain pieces of colored cloth. None of that matters to me. I have more in common with a Chinese factory worker, with a Hindu factory worker, I have more in common with workers around the world than I do my leadership, with the rich, with the ruling class.
The problem, though, is, and I suggest people read up on this a lot, is the labor movement leading up to World War I is sort of the tragic story, because that was the idea. The idea is workers would unite to prevent war. And to this day, I think that I try to imagine what world we lived in, what world we would live in today if workers had been able to shut down the war machines, if everybody working in every what today we would call a defense contractor had walked off the line and called a general strike and prevented World War I. All the generals and all the politicians get their mouths are watering at the idea of having a nice big old war. And if all the workers just said, no, we're not going to do that.
We didn't have a world war. We had a worldwide wildcat strike. Can you imagine?
But the fact was they lost. The nationalists won. And I think that we need to study why they won, because I think that's incredibly important, because I don't want to see something like that ever again. Sorry, and I think it's important. I think it's important when we talk about this stuff is we realize our defeats, and World War I is the single biggest representation or symbol of the defeat of organized labor since even the concept was developed. Because the nationalists were able to scare people enough into abandoning their principles. Yeah. And that's what scares me.
What if the people became a superorganism?
I don't know.
I'm just saying, no, like when you're talking about what if all these manufacturers said no, that's the real power. The people is the real power. And I think that the people think that the power sits in a seat over here in this fancy building. There's 545 people in control of this country right now. There are millions of us. That's where the power is.
Well, no, I mean, that is a real power as well. It's just not as big or as strong as majority could be.
Well, the problem is you have to realize you have power to have power.
Yeah.
And most people don't realize they have power. So if you don't, I could have a nuclear weapon in my backyard, which I don't, in case you're listening in CIA. And it doesn't matter if I don't know it's there, then it doesn't bring me any more power because I don't realize that level of power. And so workers have untapped levels of power, terrifying levels of power. But we just don't seem to be able to realize it in any real way. And I think that's the crux. That's the crux of the issue. How do we realize our power?
It's yet another reason why they're never going to do the totalitarian brain chip in a vaccine thing, because they can keep us squabbling with each other on Facebook. I mean, as long as we're at each other's throats over a lot of petty issues like the war on Christmas, which is a made up nothing, as long as they can keep us fighting about nonsense, we'll never realize our real power.
Yeah, there was when I first met my wife, she took me to the organization she worked for. And it's a social justice, social action organization. And there was a person there that was working with meatpacking workers. And they were trying to get them to unite, but the white workers hated the immigrant Latino workers, and the immigrant Latino workers hated the African immigrant workers. And so you have all these people that are all getting screwed over by the same people, but it's more important to them to fight each other. And that's always been the problem with organized labor. And, to some degree, I think it probably always will be. And I think it's a matter of if we can ever overcome that and see that we're all workers. Everybody's a worker. If you picked up a box, if you changed a diaper, if anything you did labor.
Right. If you don't own the means of production, then you're not them. You're the worker.
If you have a hobby, you're doing labor.
If we could tell workers of the world, I mean, maybe they should unite or something. I don't know. It seems like maybe something they could do.
And this is not new ideas. Read the IWW preamble. Read the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. I mean, it's really good, and it's been around for a while.
Well, and the one thing, the flaw in fascism is its inability to recognize its own weakness. The flaw in capitalism is its unending greed. That is the problem with capitalism. So If capitalism was smart, it would stop right where it is because it's got 99% of all the money. We have less rights than we've ever had as far as workers go, in generations. So if capitalism was smart, it would say, okay, I've got it pretty good right now. I'm just going to sort of lay low and not pass anything. But the problem with capitalism, it is an ever hungry mouth. And it is not going to be happy with having 99% of the wealth. It needs 100% of the wealth. And that is really, I think, the only hope of defeating capitalism is pointing out its unquenching thirst for greed. It will never be happy until it has everything that you have, until it has your car, until it has your home, until it has everything you have. And that is the one way that's the one hope I think we have against capitalism, is that it is unquenchably greedy.
Would you guys agree that the idea of capitalism, the theory of capitalism, is based on an unlimited supply of resources? And that
I don't know that it's based on it.
No, I think there's truth in that.
We live in a world with finite resources.
There's been some stories that have been coming out.
But
there's been some stories that have been coming out lately about Amazon. This is a half remembered article, so read the article yourself. And their turnover rate at their stores. They don't have stores. What are you talking about? At their facilities, where they're going through workers at this incredible churn and burn rate. And it's almost like an odd little pyramid scheme where there's not enough people in the world to continue Amazon's business model the way it is. Because they're going to have eventually hired and fired every single person on earth within the next 25 or 30 years. And that is not a good model for doing business. It is, and a lot of businesses are taking.
Unless you want to go to space.
There's not very many workers in space. That's the problem.
Can I read one more thing? This is from that preamble from the IWW. The working class and the employing class have nothing in common. There can be no peace so long as hunger and want are found among millions of the working people, and the few who make up the employing class have all the good things of life. Between these two classes, a struggle must go on until the workers of the world organize as a class, take possession of the means of production, abolish the wage system, and live in harmony with the earth. I love it.
I don't know. It sounds like a bunch of hippie talk to me.
There was a couple of other little so in my research I was talking about the minimum wage. So we're all here in Iowa. I don't know, I think people have probably picked that up over us talking.
I did say Warsh.
What a fucking loser. Anyway, so I thought it was kind of interesting, of the states that are bordering Iowa. There's only one. So Iowa we are the federal minimum wage. We don't have the legislation that has higher. So we are a $7.25 minimum wage. Wisconsin is also a $7.25 minimum wage. Other than them, every single state that borders Iowa has a higher minimum wage than we do. That I think is a significant thing to know.
We're also a right to work for less state.
Minnesota is $10.08. Illinois is $11.60. Missouri is $10.30. Nebraska is $9, and South Dakota is $9.45 an hour. So literally every state around us is paying their workers paying a higher minimum wage. And if you're a capitalist, I might be worried that people are being tempted to leave our state because they have better wages. So if you're looking for a dumb capitalist reason to raise the minimum wage, it's competition. And the last one that I think is kind of interesting is there's only 5 states in the entire country that have passed no legislation when it comes to the minimum wage. So they're $7.25, but they've never even passed a law about it. And I'll see if you guys can find a common string, something that maybe connects these states together. It is South Carolina, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Tennessee. Whatever do they have in common?
A Republican governor?
Well, certainly that as well. But It is amazing to think that somebody could live in a country where every state except for yours and a couple others have passed the minimum wage, and you think, no, we're doing it right. And you're not, because your state is in the bottom tiers of virtually every list, whether it's education, obesity. Sorry, they're great on obesity. Mississippi, obesity is like maybe number one. But in virtually every other category,
I'm number one in obesity.
In virtually every other category, they were ranked as number one.
It's amazing. It's the temporarily embarrassed millionaire thing. Like, they don't want to change it. What happens when they one day own their own factory? I mean, they want to pay a minimum wage too. Yeah, that's going to happen. You're going to own your own factory sometime. You're 50 and, didn't go to college, but whatever, you'll do that.
Yeah, because you're going to be rich too.
Yeah.
If you're poor,
apparently everybody can be rich, and we can just mine all of the earth.
Alexandria Pelosi did a little thing for a show, like a little mini doc for a show, and she was talking to all these various people. And there's a guy who is, and I don't say this as a pejorative, I say it because it's descriptive, a guy that was living in a shack, because he was standing out in front of it, and it's a shack. It's like some metal walls and like the roof falling in, and there's like a cot in there. And he's like, yeah, I could be a millionaire. It could happen. And it's like, you're living in a shack. You're living in a literal shack.
That's not going to happen. That's not how any of this works.
I live in lath and plaster.
It's sort of like the old quote: if you're sitting at a poker table for more than 20 minutes and you can't spot the sucker, then it's you.
It's all of you. It's all of you.
I think we probably should call it. We've been depressing enough, I think, for the evening. Hopefully there's some hope there too.
I want to make people more sad.
Well, I think we've probably done that to some degree. Do you guys have any kind of closing thoughts? I had a quote I wanted to read before we go, but
no, I'm done. I've read a lot.
Kale, you have anything else you want to say that's relevant?
Relevant. Union, minimum wage, healthcare.
I think that's if that's the only thing you take away, I think you did pretty well. I think that's a pretty good thing to take away. I mentioned Eugene V. Debs a few times. My dad still walks around with Debs for President t-shirts, which some people are kind of confused by. And so I thought it would be appropriate to close with the Eugene V. Debs quote. I said then and I say now that while there is a lower class, I am in it. While there is a criminal element, I am of it. While there is a soul in prison, I am not free. Eugene V. Debs for president, 2024.
One of my favorites of his.
All right. I want everybody to like and subscribe. We really appreciate you tuning in, and you have a great day, and hashtag Union Strong.
We'll also do our best to link most of this stuff into the down there part.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah. We're going to try to, this was going to be a dense episode. So we're going to put a whole bunch of links in the description. Please click on all those. The MIT Living Wage Project is really interesting. Anywhere in the US you click and it'll tell you where you're at. I've got a minimum wage tracker I can put up there. There's so much stuff. I guess the message here is just keep yourself educated. Try to read through all this stuff. I know it's complicated and everybody is going to tell you to stop reading and stop talking about it. But don't.
You have to fight for it. You have to fight for it.
As a very wise and scholar once said, fight the power. All right. Like and subscribe. Have a good day, everybody.